With the death of Mugabe comes to a sorry end the story of Rhodesia, of the failure called Zimbabwe now. I'll have to do a future show just on this, to devote a whole show to this history. There are some readings I can suggest. Moldbug has a good entry on it. Some say it's his best on the history of Rhodesia. You can also look up Theodore Dalrymple, a very good journalist, his real name Anthony Daniels. Here I only want to say one thing. The Rhodesians refused to let England bully them. England basically wanted to give them over to black rule because England back then, as well as now, was run by homosexual pinko commies. So the Rhodesians said no thank you very much. They declared independence, they founded a republic. And they fought hard to preserve the country their fathers had settled and built. Because know this, there is no nation there of any kind without the Rhodesians. Salisbury was a first world city. You had a case where they never lost a battle, and they wiped out forces many times their size without losing any man, and did all kinds of amazing military feats. Look up the history of the Sealess Scouts, which were integrated, by the way. But the country ceased to exist anyway. And that can happen when you have the entire world against you. It doesn't matter how good your soldiers are in that case. I told you a couple of shows ago about the end of the Portuguese Empire. Well, that happened in 1975, and Rhodesia lost its only friend in that region, Mozambique and Angola, on which Rhodesia largely depended for access to the outside world, and to trade they suddenly turned hostile. Because in 1975 there was Carnation Revolution when communists took over Portugal state. I'm exaggerating a little, but commie army officers. And they unilaterally ended a 500-year-old empire. Again, not because they were losing any wars, but because their allegiances were elsewhere. America, the Soviet Union, China, England were already hostile and trying to end Rhodesia. So after Portugal went, it lost its last thread of support. I spoke once to someone who served in Carter administration. He was hardly a cock, hardly a liberal, but he dismissed Rhodesia as just an apartheid state. When that kind of thinking infects everyone, what do? Israel is trying desperately to stop the same thing from happening to itself right now. And the weird part of it, South Africa, who you would have expected to be a friend of Rhodesia, well, it was not a friend. South Africa felt that it would be safer and stronger by ending Rhodesia, for all kinds of reasons, but most of all because they thought black tribes in the area would be easier to play divide and conquer with than Ian Smith was. So, you know, in the end, this is what happened. Rhodesia ended, they ran out of petrol, out of oil and fuel. A loser like Mugabe, who got his snot kicked in on every engagement, could thereafter anyway portray himself as a Bolivarian liberator and such. It said he had a rubber member, by the way, that having had his natural one blown off, a rubber dick, okay? Forget that most of the tribes in that area, including the Matabele, who he genocided after taking power, they did not accept his rule, so that he could hardly be called a nationalist liberator of any kind. No, instead what this whole Rhodesia episode shows is that, like French Algeria, it was one of the most concrete examples of suicide of Western civilization. But what is this suicide? Because the Rhodesians themselves, they did not lack will. They were not suicidal. The problem then, as now, was this sect, not in Rhodesia, but in the capitals of the great Western powers. A sect that has infected all Western governments. A sect that never sleeps. Never believe it was anomie or carelessness or apathy that led to the end of Rhodesia and the subsequent clown abuses of those like Mugabe, or the Mugabes they're trying right now to impose on us in Europe and the Americas. It was formerly known as communism. This is how it passed itself off, but it doesn't matter what you call it. You see in those like Harry Dexter White, the FDR administration was full of them. He was exposed by Venona papers as a Soviet asset. But the FDR administration was all people like Harry Dexter White. The John Birch Society was right about everything. A complete infestation of American and West European governments by a criminal cartel. None of the great disasters of the last century, nor the attempts to overthrow civilization today through mass migrations, none of this is an accident. It is this sect that never sleeps, and unfortunately, without a sect of our own, without a mafia of our own, there is no way out of this. A funny story before I close up for today. You want to hear about a witch hunt? Mueller and Comey previously teamed up to persecute Stephen Hatfield for the anthrax mailings after 9/11. It was a total witch hunt. There was no evidence, and ultimately the government had to pay him something like $6 million because of their insane persecution of this man. But do you know why they went after him, after Hatfield, in the first place? He was a biologist for the government labs, and he was a Rhodesian. America, that is, appreciated him and used him while he helped them fight the Soviets in 70s, in times like that. But in the later part of his life, his rewards and the reward of Rhodesians was to be accused of these vile crimes, the anthrax thing that he had nothing to do with, and to be singled out because of his national background, because he was part of a nation and an allegiance that was now déclassé and considered suspect by the American deep state. A convenient target, because now a fashionable one. And I'm surprised Tucker Carlson hasn't had Hatfield on his show, because much could be made clear for the American people about the character of Comey, of Mueller, and indeed of the agencies they represent, of the American deep state as such. Much could be made clear too about how America treats its friends. I forget who it is who said, America is getting a reputation for being harmless to enemies and treacherous to friends. And the story of Stephen Hatfield, the story of Rhodesia, shows this better than anything else. Lack of loyalty. To be known as disloyal is the end of you politically.